The house lay wrapped in silence, the kind of stillness that made every creak of the floorboards echo like a confession. I lay in bed, eyes closed, body slack, the perfect imitation of sleep. My breathing rose and fell with practiced rhythm, but my pulse raced beneath the covers. Somewhere across the room, faint movements stirred, a shadow breaking the stillness, deliberate and cautious. A desk drawer whispered open, wood sliding against wood, followed by the almost inaudible shuffle of papers. I resisted the urge to flinch, to react, knowing a single twitch could betray me. Whoever had slipped inside wasn't after jewelry or money. Their focus was fixed on something more dangerous, something hidden among my papers. The darkness thickened with every heartbeat. Suspense winding tighter. I knew this night wasn't ordinary, and if I revealed I was awake, everything would unravel. There was a time when the very papers now rustling in the dark would have meant nothing more than mundane pages of life, lists, letters, scattered notes. Back then, I trusted freely. My world was painted in warm colors, dinners filled with laughter, nights spent trading stories with family, the comfort of friends who felt closer than blood. We built each other up with words of encouragement, with promises sealed over coffee cups and long walks. I believed then that loyalty was permanent, that bonds were unbreakable, but memory has a cruel way of intruding, especially on nights like this. I remember the first fractures, glances held too long, conversations that seemed rehearsed, a hesitation in voices I once thought steady. Suspicion crept in quietly, like a draft slipping under a door, unnoticed until the chill consumed the whole room. The very people I once would have entrusted with everything began to feel like strangers wearing familiar faces. The warmth of shared laughter now echoes against me as a taunt. Those evenings of trust contrast sharply with the cold calculation I feel tonight as unseen hands search for the very documents I swore to protect. Once I would have laughed openly with them at a table. Now I lie motionless, pretending to sleep, waiting for the shadow to reveal itself. What happened to the bond that once made me feel safe? Did greed twist it, or envy, or the simple rot of time? It hurts more than fear itself. The knowledge that betrayal often comes not from outside threats, but from those you once let close. That thought coils around me as tightly as the blanket I grip in feigned slumber. The unity I once celebrated has transformed into a battlefield of suspicion, where every smile from the past feels like a mask hiding the present truth. And as the papers shuffle again in the dark, I realize the cruelest part. Trust doesn't vanish all at once. It unravels slowly, thread by thread, till the tapestry you once wrapped yourself in for warmth becomes nothing more than scraps, and the cold feels unbearable. Betrayal does not announce itself with a shout. It tiptoes in quietly, dressing itself in small details, almost invisible at first. The first sign was a book gone missing, a worn leather journal I kept by the desk, filled with nothing more. Then reflections and sketches. No one else had reason to touch it, and yet one day it was gone, only to reappear days later in a slightly different place. I told myself it was forgetfulness, a lapse of memory, but unease had already begun to stir. Then came the whispers, feigned at first, caught in hallways or behind closed doors, conversations that fell silent when I entered. The tone carried more weight than the words I couldn't quite make out. Laughter that once felt shared now seemed edged with something else. Secrecy, maybe even mockery. The air itself seemed to hold its breath when I passed. The sideways glances followed. I would catch them exchanging looks when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Fleeting but sharp enough to sting. A raised eyebrow here, a smirk there, all quickly smoothed into false normalcy when my eyes lifted. Each moment was small, defensible, even dismissible on its own. But together they wove a tapestry of unease. Objects began shifting places, a locked drawer slightly ajar, papers folded differently than I had left them. A letter opened and resealed. At first I wondered if I was imagining things, if suspicion itself was bending my perception. Yet each clue seemed too precise, too deliberate to be coincidence. The world I had once considered safe now felt stage-managed, as though I were living under surveillance in my own home. It was the silence that confirmed it for me. Silence in spaces where there should have been chatter. Silence weighted with intent. When trust is whole, silence is comfortable, companionable. But this was something else, an emptiness that hummed with hidden meanings. My instincts whispered what my heart refused to admit. Something was wrong. Trust, once so natural, now felt dangerous. The people I once relied upon seemed to move like actors rehearsing a play. And I was the audience left to guess the plot. And through it all, the papers, those seemingly ordinary sheets of ink and truth, grew heavier in importance. I began to understand that whatever shadow was growing among them was circling closer, hungrier, waiting for a chance to strike. Some lives are built loudly, with celebrations, declarations, and the constant validation of applause. Mine was not. My life was built in silence, in late nights at the desk, in carefully guarded choices, in sacrifices no one else noticed. Every brick of that silence held something irreplaceable. The weight of perseverance, the cost of restraint, and the quiet victories of survival. The papers hidden in my desk were not just documents, they were a lifeline. On their thin, fragile pages rested decades of my existence, compressed into words and signatures. They were deeds, receipts, letters, and confessions, a mosaic of everything I had fought for. To the untrained eye, they might have looked like clutter, the relics of someone too careful or too paranoid. But I knew better. Those pages were proof. Proof that I had lived honestly, worked relentlessly, and protected what was mine even when no one else believed in its worth. Each page carried a story. Property acquired not through inheritance, but through sweat. Every contract bearing witness to nights spent working 2 jobs. Letters written in moments of vulnerability, unsent but preserved. Reminders of wounds healed over time. Records of debts repaid, accounts balanced, small triumphs won in a world quick to dismiss the quiet and the aging. The papers were not just history, they were identity. Without them, the threads of my story could be pulled apart until nothing remained. I had learned long ago that silence was not weakness, it was armor. Speaking less meant others underestimated me, dismissed me, overlooked me. And in that dismissal, I carved out my strength. Every slight ignored became another reason to build. Every betrayal endured became another reason to protect. My papers were the vault of that resilience, each line inked with determination. But silence comes with a price. Few knew the truth of what I carried. Family and friends believed what they wished, that I was overly cautious, perhaps eccentric. They did not see the sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, the discipline required to keep the foundation steady. They saw only the surface, a quiet figure, reserved, predictable. They never realized that beneath the calm exterior, I was curating a life that could withstand storms. And storms had come. Loss, illness, abandonment, the usual devastations life scatters across years. Each one could have hollowed me out, left me drifting. Instead, I documented, preserved, rebuilt. I turned grief into records, instability into evidence of continuity. If life threatened to erase me, I would answer with proof that I had been here, that I had endured, that my legacy would not be rewritten by others. That was why the papers mattered. They were not just sheets of ink and dust. They were the embodiment of decades where I chose silence over spectacle, resilience over surrender. Without them, I was vulnerable to distortion, to others deciding my worth, my truth, my history. With them, I held my life in my own hands, and now someone else wanted them. That realization tightened around me like a vice. Whoever prowled in my silence was not after money or objects of convenience. They were after my truth, my legacy. They wanted to seize not just my possessions, but my very narrative. The papers were more than words, they were me. And I knew then, as shadows moved across my home, that I would fight to keep them safe, not because they were fragile, but because they were everything. The house was wrapped in midnight silence. The kind of stillness where every creak of the floorboards becomes a thunderclap. I lay in bed, my breathing even, my body heavy against the mattress, the perfect mimicry of sleep. But my eyes, though closed, were alive with awareness. Could feel it. The air had shifted. The shadows were not my own. At first, it was faint. The brush of a shoe against the wooden floor, the faint rattle of a doorknob, the whisper of hushed breaths just beyond my room. My heart thudded, urging me to rise, to defend, to scream. But I held still, knowing that movement would betray me. To them, I had to be the sleeping figure, oblivious, defenseless. My silence was not weakness, it was strategy. The door to my room opened with a careful slowness, as though they feared the very sound of intrusion might expose them. A slice of shadow cut across the floor, widening until it touched the edge. Of my bed, I did not stir. My breath rose and fell in rhythm, measured, rehearsed. Through half-lidded lashes, I glimpsed them. Figures moving like predators, their outlines jagged in the dim glow from the hallway. They thought I was blind to them, but I saw enough. One moved toward the desk, his hand already reaching, rifling, through drawers. The other lingered near the bed, watching me, his posture tense as though weighing whether I might wake. His presence pressed against my skin like a blade, sharp and unrelenting. My fingers twitched against the sheets, but I forced them still. To fight too soon would mean losing everything. Their whispers slithered through the air, greedy and impatient. "It has to be here," one hissed. The papers check again. Drawers opened, wood scraping against wood. Papers shuffled, tossed aside, their value invisible to eyes clouded by greed. They were looking for what I had spent a lifetime protecting. To them, the papers were leverage, wealth, power. To me, they were existence itself. I felt rage coil within me, hot and insistent, demanding I rise, that I snatch back what was mine. But I knew the danger. They were stronger, younger, desperate. Confronting them now, unprepared, would not end with victory. My strength was not in force, but in endurance, in silence. And so I waited, each second stretched taut like wire, each breath a battle against the urge to move. The one at the desk cursed under his breath. He had found a box, the wrong one, filled with meaningless receipts. He hurled it aside, frustration echoing like a hammer strike. The sound reverberated through me, but I remained still, the mask of slumber intact. The watcher by my bed leaned closer, his breath warm and foul against my cheek. He studied me, searching for betrayal in my stillness. My heart pounded so loudly I feared he could hear it, but his suspicion passed. He straightened, muttering, "She's out cold, out cold, if only he knew." Beneath the veil of sleep, my mind was sharper than ever, cataloging every sound, every movement, every weakness. Their greed had blinded them, but my silence armed me. The longer they searched, the more reckless they became, their voices louder, their movements clumsier. In their frenzy, they revealed themselves not just intruders, but cowards cloaked in desperation. And me, the one they believed powerless, lay quietly gathering strength. The night was theirs in noise and motion. But in silence, the night belonged to me. It would have been easier if they were strangers, thieves with no faces, no history, no connection to the blood in my veins. But as the light shifted and a whisper escaped carelessly, recognition slammed into me with the force of a blade. The voice wasn't foreign, wasn't a monster from the outside world, was family. My chest tightened, the steady rhythm of my breath faltering for the first time that night. I had rehearsed the mask of sleep to perfection, but nothing could. Prepare me for the cruel familiarity of the voices plotting in the dark. These were the very people I had once trusted with my laughter, my secrets, my heart. The realization settled heavy, heavier than fear itself. Betrayal does not come from enemies, it comes from those we love. The shuffle of papers, the scrape of drawers, the muffled curses, all took on a different meaning now. It wasn't greed alone that moved them, it was entitlement. They weren't strangers stealing from me. They were loved ones convinced they had a right to take. My mind reeled, colliding with fragments of memory, shared meals, warm embraces, promises made in softer times. Each recollection burned now, twisted into mockeries of trust. Fear I could withstand. Fear sharpens the senses, keeps you alive. But betrayal corrodes from within, eroding every foundation you thought unshakable. I had spent years believing loyalty bound us, that sacrifice and love would be remembered. Yet here they were, hands rifling through the evidence of my life's worth, reducing it to currency, to leverage. The pain was suffocating. My heart did not just race, it ached. Every word they muttered was a dagger, every impatient sigh, a fracture in the fragile glass of what once was family. I wanted to cry out, to demand why, to shatter the illusion of my sleep and force their eyes to meet mine. But the silence held me hostage, whispering that knowledge was power and power meant patience. In that moment, the house itself seemed to turn on me. The walls that once sheltered us as a family now echoed with their greed. The furniture, the photographs, the memories, all tainted. I realized that what they sought to steal was not just paper, not just inheritance or legacy. They were stealing my faith, dismantling the sacred bond we once shared. And still I lay unmoving, not because I was powerless, but because I knew the truth. Betrayal cannot be fought in the same way as danger. You cannot wrestle it to the ground, cannot scream it away. Betrayal lingers long after the moment passes, its wounds unseen but deep. The fear of losing my papers was sharp, but the pain of losing my family was sharper. Their shadows moved like strangers across the room, yet I could see their faces in my mind, smiling as they once did. The contrast was unbearable. My breath threatened to break the rhythm of sleep, but I forced control. To let them know I was awake would not only expose me, it would expose the rawness of my wound. And I refused to give them that power. I thought I had prepared for theft, for greed, even for danger. But nothing had prepared me for this. The weight of betrayal, heavier than silence, heavier than fear, pressing against my chest until every breath became a battle. Long before the whispers in the night, I had known that trust was fragile. Love could blur judgment, but intuition has a way of cutting through the fog. Quietly, without announcement, I began weaving a web of protection around what mattered most. Not the possessions they assumed, not the obvious stacks of paper left in unlocked drawers, but the truth buried deeper, layered with intention. The intruders rustled through cabinets and boxes, finding scraps, unsigned drafts, and meaningless letters exactly as I had planned. Those decoy papers were bait, planted for the very greed, now exposing itself. I imagined their triumphant smirks as they pocketed what they thought were keys to fortune, blind to the fact that their prize was ash disguised as gold. For years I had worked in silence, while they dismissed me as fragile, distracted, irrelevant. I spent nights cataloging every document, every certificate, every deed that carried my real legacy. Hidden safes, tucked behind walls and under floorboards, guarded the truth. Not obvious safes either, but ones disguised as ordinary objects. A hollowed book, a locked box beneath winter clothes, even a drawer with a false bottom. To anyone else, it would look like clutter. To me, it was fortress. Each layer of protection carried not just caution, but foresight. I knew greed could turn familiar faces strange, and so I planned as if betrayal was inevitable. This preparation wasn't paranoia, it was resilience. My papers were more than property. They were pieces of my life, sacrifices translated into ink and signatures. And I refused to let them fall into unworthy hands. As I lay there pretending to sleep, I felt no panic. Their theft was an illusion, their whispers a performance. They believed themselves clever, but their ignorance was my shield. Suspense tightened the air, but inside me, calm took root. I had already signed away their imagined future, already secured the legacy they thought they were stealing. The irony almost drew a smile to my lips. They searched like scavengers in the dark, but they were only chasing shadows. The real weight of my foresight was hidden far beyond their reach. Every misplaced paper, every unlocked drawer, every accessible box was a step in the labyrinth I had designed, and they were lost inside it. The longer they searched, the deeper their arrogance revealed itself. And the deeper their arrogance, the stronger my silence became. I was not powerless. I was prepared. The moment had ripened like fruit too heavy for its branch. For too long I had played the silent witness, breath shallow, eyes closed, body still as if asleep. But silence has its limits. A breaking point comes when shadows no longer hide, betrayal but illuminate it. I rose slowly from the bed, the movement deliberate, and the air in the room thickened. Their hands froze mid-search, their bodies rigid, their whispers severed. The illusion of control shattered the moment I stood. They turned to face me, expecting perhaps an outburst, tears, or pleas. Instead, I carried only a faint smile, as though I had been waiting for this precise moment. In my hands, not fear but papers, the true documents, the ones they could never have found. Their eyes widened, darting between the decoys clutched in their fists and the truths now resting against my chest. "You thought you knew where my life was kept," I said softly. My voice held no anger, only certainty. "But what you've stolen are scraps, shadows. What matters never lived in your reach." Their faces twisted, disbelief curdling into frustration. One tried to speak, to demand explanation, but words faltered under the weight of my composure. For the first time, they saw not frailty, but foresight. Not the woman they had underestimated, but the architect of their undoing. I spread the papers across the table. Legal seals, signatures, investments, transfers. Each sheet spoke louder than their greedy whispers. My estate was already secured, my will rewritten, my legacy shielded. Those who sought to take by stealth had already been cut away by ink sharper than any blade. Shock cracked through the room. Its confidence they had carried like armor dissolved into panic. They understood now that their late-night betrayal had not only failed but revealed their true selves, and I had been watching all along. Greed collided with wisdom, and wisdom stood unshaken. The confrontation was not loud, did not need to be. It was the quiet unveiling of truth, the steady hand showing them a future they could no longer claim. They wanted victory in shadows, but I gave them revelation in light. And revelation, I knew, was the heavier blow. For years they thought I lived in their debt, clinging to the security they would one day inherit. Tonight they learned the opposite. I owed them nothing, and their future was never theirs to take. My silence had been my shield, my planning their undoing as I gathered the papers back into my arms. I looked into their stunned faces. "You tried to steal what you never earned," I said, voice quiet but sharp. "And now you see, I was never asleep." The truth lingered in the air, heavier than any lock or safe. They had come seeking power, but left with mirrors reflecting only their greed. And I, standing steady, knew this confrontation was not my defeat, but their revelation. The room, once swollen with tension, now sat in silence. The intruders no longer faceless shadows, but people I had once trusted avoided my gaze. Shame colored their faces, though anger flickered beneath it, the kind that seeks to shift. blame rather than accept truth. Their hands still clutched the decoy papers, trembling, useless trophies of a failed betrayal. They could not meet my eyes, perhaps because my calmness weighed heavier than any scolding could. In their minds, excuses tumbled, justifications ready, but none could pierce the reality before them. They had broken more than a lock, more than trust. They had broken themselves. Greed had exposed them, and they could not escape the reflection it forced upon their souls. I felt no triumph in their defeat, only clarity. For years, I had believed love was protection enough that family bonds could resist the erosion of entitlement. But betrayal teaches lessons harsher than affection ever can. I realized then that my true shield had never been there. Loyalty. It had been my foresight, my quiet planning, my unshaken dignity. Resilience, I understood, is not about surviving blows. It is about anticipating storms and choosing to stand steady before they arrive. They had plotted to corner me in my weakness, but my strength was never where they thought it lay. It wasn't in the papers, nor in the wealth attached to them. It was in the decision to see clearly, to prepare silently, to live with eyes open even when others thought I was asleep. The aftermath stretched beyond that night. Their ties with me, once bound in laughter and memories, now frayed like old rope. Some turned away, bitterness spilling from their silence, unwilling to face the mirror of their greed. Others lingered, guilt heavy on their shoulders, perhaps, hoping for forgiveness, perhaps fearing the emptiness their actions had created. But none could undo what had been revealed. I, however, felt lighter. Betrayal, once feared, had become my liberation. No longer did I carry the burden of wondering who I could trust. The masks had fallen, the truth laid bare. And in truth, there is always freedom. As I sat alone later, the papers safe once again, I reflected not on what I had lost, but on what I had preserved: my dignity. They could steal objects, attempt to seize inheritance, twist promises into entitlement. But they could never claim my resilience. That belonged to me alone. The night had begun with shadows creeping across the floor, with whispers meant to strip me of everything I had built. But it ended with me standing, steady and unbroken, the keeper of my own legacy. They had come seeking power, and instead, they left fractured by the weight of their choices. The consequences were not mine to bear. They belonged to those who allowed greed to hollow their hearts. My task was simpler: to carry on with foresight, to protect what mattered, and to remember that dignity, once safeguarded, outlives even the deepest betrayal. The night had begun with me lying still, feigning the rhythm of sleep while shadows drifted across the room. Every breath was deliberate, every flicker of silence a mask to hide the storm within. They believed they had me cornered, powerless, oblivious, defenseless. But as their hands reached for what they thought was my life's worth, I smiled in the dark. I knew then, as I know now, that I had been one step ahead all along. Pretending to sleep was never weakness. It was foresight. Just as the decoy papers fooled their greedy fingers, my calm disguise revealed their true selves. They mistook silence for surrender, but silence was my strength. I allowed them to show me who they were, and in that revelation, their fate was sealed. Greed, I realized, blinds even the sharpest eyes. It narrows vision until all that matters is possession, not principle. Entitlement, not effort. They came seeking power, yet they stumbled into their own downfall, shackled by the very hunger that drove them. Foresight, however, is freedom. It is the quiet choice to prepare rather than to panic, to act rather than to react. In protecting what mattered, I safeguarded not only my legacy, but also my dignity. They walked away burdened with shame, while I remained steady, lighter, freer, untouchable, as I reflect. The lesson sharpens. Betrayal wounds, but foresight shields. Arrogance fades, but dignity endures. To those who believe that power lies in taking, let this be a reminder. True strength belongs to the one who can see beyond greed, who prepares in silence and who smiles even when shadows move in the night. I was never asleep. I was watching, waiting, knowing. And when the moment came, it was not they who claimed my future. It was I who claimed my peace.